What's happening, Hardscapers? This is episode 254 of the How to Hardscape podcast, where we talk about how you can start and grow your hardscaping business. And in my effort to bring on more stoneworkers, more masons onto the show, we have Bryce Hollingsworth of Stone Bear Mason on today's episode, talking everything stonework, from the skills that he's picked up along the way, the people that he's met and worked for, and what he's been able to bring along with him with starting his own business, and how he looks at what he does with stone and the things that he builds with stone. A really wide-ranging conversation here, but most definitely a great one. And before we get into today's episode, we want to thank our sponsor, Cycle CPA. If you're looking for bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA at cyclecpa.com. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you with money off their services there. If you're looking for a software to hop into in 2024 and beyond, the How to Hardscape headquarters software can help you budget, estimate job cost, schedule, time tracking, employee management. You can create courses and assign them to your employees. You have access to our courses that you can use to onboard and train employees as well. And our app is coming out in just a couple of weeks. And when that does, the pricing is going to increase for new users. Existing users are already locked into their feature tiered pricing. But as we release more and more features, that pricing is going to increase for new users who get locked up at whatever they sign up at. So if you're looking to get in, send me a message at How to Hardscape on Instagram or members.howtohardscape.com to learn more about this. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Bryce Hollingsworth of Stone Bear Mason. Today we're joined by Bryce Hollingsworth. He is Stone Bear Mason on Instagram at Stone Bear Mason, stoneworker, dry stone waller. Bryce, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Bryce, let's get started to get to know a little bit more about you, yourself, how you got started in the industry. Start wherever you want, take us wherever you want, but give us a little bit of background about what brought you to where you are today with your business.
Sure. So I started off like just as a laborer for a guy down in Southern Connecticut for $12.50 an hour cash, which was pretty brutal. But he was a great guy to get started with. I mean, he did dry stone, he did wet work, he did concrete, carpentry, plants. So he did a little bit of everything. And I worked with him for a season. And it gave me a lot of exposure to a bunch of different things. And I liked everything pretty all right, but the stonework I really liked the best. You know, I took to that really well, and we had there's quite a bit of dry stone in Southern Connecticut. So I got the opportunity to get a lot of work in early. And I knew that I liked that way more than the other stuff. So I just kind of focused really hard on that. And I was like, this is the thing I'm going to do.
What was your introduction? Is that like, did you know anything about the industry before you even like threw yourself into that $12.50 an hour job? Or was this like a complete, oh, this industry exists and you're just starting to learn about it there?
Sure. I had done a lot of manual labor jobs growing up. And, you know, in the summers, I'd work for my Uncle Jay doing like construction grunt work for him. So I'd had some exposure to just manual labor and construction jobs in general, but specifically stone, no. Before I got into stonework, I actually spent a couple of years at a desk job, and I hated it, you know. I really enjoy working with my hands and making things, and I always liked doing that growing up. But everyone tells you that's not the kind of work you're supposed to do or want to do. Like even, you know, so I went to college and all that, but even while I was in college, you know, I worked landscaping and things like that, and I really enjoyed it. And again, I was like, oh, this is just something that I'm doing for now, but I'm not supposed to do this later. And then, you go and you get the job that you're supposed to want, or that everyone says you're supposed to want. And I was good at it. I was good at, the job I had, but I hated it. And I was just like, no, I don't want to do this. I want to be outside. I want to be doing something. And I mean, even hauling rocks at 12.50 an hour, I was way happier doing that than I was sitting at a desk. You couldn't pay me to sit at a desk ever again. I don't think I could do that. Like I'll haul rocks all day instead of sitting at a desk.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so no, I didn't really have a whole lot of uh, industry experience specific to stonework before I started doing that. But as soon as I knew that, as soon as I started doing it, I loved it, and I was just like, all right, I'm just going to go all in on this. And when I get into something, I get pretty into it. It just becomes everything, and everything else kind of takes a back seat.
Yeah. If
Yeah.
so, you fall in love with the stonework aspect of that job. At what point in the timeline do you actually go off and you start your own thing?
I think I started my business maybe 4 years after that.
Oh yeah.
So I like hit the ground pretty hard. I worked for him for a season. I worked for I worked for another guy for the next season, and I started doing my own jobs like on the weekends. So like that second year was pretty brutal because I was going 7 days a week. I'd do 4 or 5 days for another guy, and then I would do my own stuff like 2, 3 days a week. And that was pretty rough. But that's when it first started. I was like, I'm making more on the 2 to 3 days a week for myself than I am for this other guy. And also, the guy I was working for wasn't great. He was not a good person to work for. And I was his entire stone crew. He had a landscaping business. So I did all the stonework by myself. And I was a foreman for one of his landscaping crews. And we had no machinery, no support. So I was just like burning it. And, we were working like 12, 14-hour days.
Oh
I,
man.
yeah, I like was destroying. I think we did something like 120 jobs in 9 months or something like that.
What?
Just, yeah, just burning it. And he didn't pay very well. And it was a pretty negative experience. But then, so I would do that 4 days, 4 or 5 days a week. And then the other 2, 3 days a week, I'm doing my jobs. And I'm just like, okay, we definitely need to get to that as soon as possible. Um, and yeah, but I wanted to build up my skills, get better, learn more. And actually, I ended up working for someone. The last guy I worked for before I went off on my own, his name is Bjorn. His company is Stonescapes here in the Pioneer Valley, Massachusetts. And he was very supportive of what I wanted to do. So, like, some opportunities arose while I was working for him. I got the opportunity to go and work in Ireland with a guy named Fergus Packman. I got the opportunity to go down to Kentucky and enter the stonewalling competition down there. A couple things like that showed up, and he was like, go do it. Like, your job will be here when you get back. Don't worry about it. He paid me during the time I was away, those weeks I was away, which was like a very quality move and huge for me at that time. And just really, when I did work for him, and I was like, oh, okay, this is what a good boss is. This is someone who understands what I'm trying to do. You know, I learned a lot working for him, and I got the opportunity to do these other things and develop my skills. And so when I did go solo and did go work for myself, like, if he calls me up ever and he needs a sub, or he's like, hey, I need another set of hands or whatever, and vice versa. I've been like, hey, you know, I need help with this. And like we have a really, really good working relationship now. And we help each other out a lot. And it was just such a huge difference compared to, working for a guy who's just trying to squeeze every little thing out of every single guy. You know, when you're doing 100+ jobs in 9 months and like no one's really getting paid that much, it's not a good business model, right? It's like the only one making money is him. And it's like the reason why you have to do that many jobs is because like, oh, like we have to do a bunch of like 3 to 4 day jobs, and they have to be 3 to 4 days because if they take longer than that, they're not profitable anymore. You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
just like everyone's on high alert and super stressed out, and you're just torching yourself, and like that's just not the right way to do it, you know. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, and so yeah, I think I did 4 years, and then I was like, okay, I'm starting my own thing, and we're going.
Nice.
Yeah,
So there's quite a bit here that I kind of want to unpack. So we're gonna be kind of jumping around here. So bear with me.
totally fine. Yeah,
The when you're talking about like the skills that you pick up, so you're able to go to Ireland, learn a little bit, bring it back here. Like what are the skills? Can you pinpoint like what it takes to
sure,
actually be a mason and to do these the stonework that you do and the skills that you kind of picked up and built upon along the way?
sure. Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, you just need a lot of wall time, right? You need to spend like I build primarily walls, especially when you're first starting out. You just need to get time on the wall. That's how you get better at anything. You just have to do it over and over and over and over again. Um, if you're only doing it every now and then, you're just not going to get better.
Mhm.
So, the reason why I was so focused on working for these other guys was to get as much wall time as possible with them. And, you know, because around here, it, it's pretty competitive. And I know a lot of guys that they don't really do a lot of walls. And then they can't get more walls, right? Because you're gonna get hired for what you do. So I know a lot of dudes that just end up getting kind of pushed to the flat work, and that's all they get because that's all that's on their website. That's all that they get to do. So, um, in terms of walling specifically, um, when you wall a lot, you will make faster decisions. Your eye will get better. You will be able to build more efficiently, and you'll be able to see, your visual spatial will get tuned up. Lines will get tuned up. You won't need levels. You won't need strings. They're important things to have in your back pocket, but you'll just be able to go that much faster with less exertion. And all of a sudden, it just keeps flowing and flowing and flowing. And then, you know, you use the hammer less, you shape less, you're able to just find the right rock for the right spot. And all of that comes from just doing it a lot. When you work with other guys who are really good, you will get way better because you're just trying to keep up with that guy, right? And if you're always working alone, you might be making mistakes without knowing it, and you'll just keep kind of ingraining those mistakes into how you build. Um, I've spent a lot of time specifically working with other people as much as possible because you learn so much trying to build like somebody else. Anyone can build the way they want to build. Anyone can build on top of the way that they build. The things that you leave for yourself. Like what your plan was when you built that the first time. But when you build with other people and have to build over what they've put, you need to figure out, you have to get in their head and figure out, okay, what was he looking to do here? Why did he leave it this way? What was the plan? And you don't want to build a section that looks different from the rest of the wall, right? It's got to be seamless. So the more you do that with the more different people, all of a sudden your range is so huge, and you can make yourself think like different guys, and you can make yourself blend, and each person has a different style, and then different regions literally have different styles of building, different types of stone. The more different types of stone you use, the more familiar you are with them. I know guys, they that stay in a specific like area, and all the stone's the same, and they're very comfortable using that stone and building with it, but they don't branch out, and they don't feel comfortable with other types of stone because they've never worked with it before. And the stone in a lot of ways can kind of dictate the style or the build, right? Because a lot of you're trying to be as efficient with that stone. So if you don't branch out and you don't work with different things, you don't really get to flex those other muscles in your brain and see what else is possible. So going to Ireland, back to that, Fergus works with what's called a karst limestone. It's actually a really hard, dense limestone, which is unusual because limestone is usually soft. It's got crazy grip, and it's really jagged. It's not shapeable. You're putting it in as is. So, and he's been working with this stuff for like 20 years. So he knows how to work with this better than anybody. And so working with him, I had to like totally not think about this the way I would normally approach the wall, and take a new approach to how I'm going to build, because it's like, this is what we have and we have to make this work. And, you might be able to do some things with this stone that you might not be able to do with other types of stone because it's got so much grip. And like, once it's in, it's locked in, it's not moving. And like, there's definitely, and it's super jagged and weird. And it just was like, okay, I have to kind of start over and like pretend I'm learning all over again. And the dude is super fast. He just like doesn't stop all day. And I'm just like, he's like 150 pounds, and he's just flying. And I'm just like, oh man, at the time I was like in my 20s and in pretty good shape. And I am struggling to keep up with this like dude who's just crushing it. So experiences like that, you get crazy, crazy spikes of improvement in like a super short period of time if you take advantage of the situation when you're in it. Like if you take it seriously, we're like, okay, I'm going to school right now, and I am just going to absolutely do everything I can to just go 100 miles an hour and do the best work possible. Like, and I've done that a bunch of different times with a bunch of different guys. And like, that's when you get like the most growth, the fastest, I'd say. Um, and doing things like that all over the world with a bunch of different really talented people is like that's like how I've learned. Like, I didn't go to school for this, you know, I didn't grow up doing this. It's just like, okay, I'm just going to soak up as much as I can from all of these really amazing people. And like, that's how I'm going to get better.
All right, so I'm taking notes as you're talking here, so I'm not looking down and not listening to you here. But
That's
um,
all good.
when it comes to something that you picked up over there in Ireland from Fergus, is there anything that you can specifically point to and say this specific piece of advice from him made me a much better stoneworker? Something that might
Yes.
be even obvious to you right now, but do you have like a specific thing that you could point to and say that made me a better stoneworker?
Yeah. He said this, I remember very specifically. Um, he's like, everyone's always worried about like face, like the face of the stone, the face of the wall, like clean, nice face. He's like, there is no face. Don't even think about the face. Like, don't worry about the face. Everyone spends all this time and energy trying to like get rid of the face, like hit your line, like build strong, build structural, and build to your line. And then all of a sudden the face looks great because all of a sudden all of those points line up and you get a plane. And all anyone sees is the plane and the lines of the plane. You might zoom in and look at individual rocks and like that rock might look weird, that rock. But when you look at the wall as a whole, the wall will have a face that's lined up with the points, these individual points that make your plane. So stop worrying about the face. Stop thinking about what a rock looks like. Think about how can I build with this? Can I build with this? Will it be strong? And the wall will look good. And it's true. It's true. And, especially with the type of stone he was working, that was really great advice because a lot of it is really jagged and irregular. And when I'm working with stone, you know, that is rougher. It's such an important thing to remember because you start looking too close at the individual rock and you're like, and then you're like, take a step back. And it looks awesome. It's going to look awesome if you build it strong, build it right, hit your line. And people get too worked up and too zoned in on the individual face of the individual rock, and like it kills your productivity, and it also like will make a lesser product if you're not thinking about the big picture, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And having said that, talking about different types of stone and how they feel and how they work and how hard they are, is there a specific stone that you prefer to work with, or is it site dependent? Like, does it depend on the area, the location, and what you're working with? What's your thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, generally, there have been a couple of exceptions, but generally, I try to work with whatever is local to the site or reasonably local to the site, geologically the same. If I'm coming in and I'm doing a rebuild or if I'm trying to match existing structures on a site, I want it to be the same stone or as close as I could possibly get. Um, you know, there have been a couple of jobs where someone wanted a specific type of stone and it was not at all local, but what they wanted was the finished product that you get with that type of stone, which I understand. But I would say 95% of the time, I'm using something that is relatively local to wherever the site itself is because it'll look right. You know, if you have any type of ledge or outcropping or other stone on your property, you don't, it wouldn't make sense for you to have, you know, it wouldn't make sense to have like stone from Pennsylvania on your property when literally all the other stone on your property is from there and they'll look completely different, you know. And as much as I can use stone from the property, I try to, even if it's just a little bit, because like it's there. That makes sense, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Is Fergus Packman like really well known in the stoneworking world, and that was kind of what the person that you sought after to go to Ireland to learn more about? Or yeah, I'll just leave it at that there.
Sure. I guess I'd say he's pretty well known, at least in the dry stone
Mhm.
community. There's not a ton of us, so
Yeah.
it's a pretty small world.
Yeah.
Um, and I wanted to work with him because a lot of what he was doing was different, and the stone he was working was different and very unlike what I was doing at the time. I was able to work with him actually because, like a year prior to that, I had actually gone to Australia for like 2 months, and I worked with some guys down there. And one of the guys I worked with, a super talented guy named Josh Bowes. His Instagram handle is Drystone Jackson. Super talented person. Like the guy he can paint, he can draw, he can, he's mechanically minded. He fixes up old cars, and like He can carve. He's a mason, dry, wet, whatever. It's like the dude is just like a builder and a maker and a creator. He's like an awesome, awesome guy. And I was lucky enough to work with him for part of the time I was in Australia. And he and Fergus know each other really well. They're really good friends. Josh had gone to Ireland and worked with him. Fergus had gone to Australia and worked with him. And I kind of, I kind of felt more comfortable reaching out to Fergus after I had worked with Josh because, they're close. And Josh basically said I did okay. So that kind of led to that because I knew I needed to get more time in with more better people. And that's kind of how that worked out.
Gotcha. And the reason why I ask is because we just had another stoneworker on the podcast, and he mentioned Lou French. And I wish
Yeah,
I would have asked that further because I had no clue about Lou French. I'm just
sure,
learning
sure,
about the stoneworking world. So
sure.
it's pretty incredible the work that you guys do and they do. And I just want to learn more and more names and see how they're actually associated with the industry. And I was able to watch a short documentary on Lou French and learn a little bit more about him and his relationship with stone and then these natural elements. I don't know if you're familiar with that short little documentary, but at least like Lou French talks about having a very like a very close bond with the stone and how it's almost like a spiritual experience when he's building something. Do you feel something similar to that for you? What do you feel when you're actually building with natural stone and the end product? And do you see it as an art? Like, do you see yourself and refer to yourself as an artist when you are building something with stone?
Sure. I really like working with stone because it just feels very real. I feel very grounded. It feels very tangible. You build something and like that was not there before, and now it is here and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. You know, when I'm there is a very organic element to it. Um, and it it's very satisfying, you know. If I'm working with stone all day, I could easily just like throw on some music and all of a sudden like 8 hours just happens. Like sometimes I used to be really bad about this. Now I set alarms, but I would like forget to eat because I would just go all day and then I'd be like, oh, it's been 8 hours. And you just get into the zone and you flow and it feels amazing. You don't think about anything really when you're really cooking and you're in the sweet spot. You don't think about anything; it just happens, and that is the best. Um, and there's not too many different things I've done where I feel like I've felt that on a regular basis, but that happens pretty frequently, especially when I'm working alone. If you're working with a lot of different people and there's equipment and machinery, it's kind of harder to get into a flow. But when you're working solo, man, you're just like, oh, it's a great feeling. Um, as for this is the thing that I've heard a lot of people say, and it gets kicked around a lot, the artist versus builder debate. I mean, you can call it whatever you want to call it. I think some people have really strong feelings about it. I, I, for me, I just really like making stuff. I really like building. I would say, you know, most everything I build is structural. Um, and I really care about the structural integrity of whatever I'm building. I have been a part of some more like artistic ventures. I've done some installations and stuff like that, and that's interesting to me too. I enjoy the design aspect of that, but it's got to be strong. Like whatever you're building, like I'm not interested in making something that just looks good but isn't structurally sound. And that matters to me a lot. And I'm sure anyone, who, whether they call themselves an artist or builder would feel the same way. But, you know, I think, yeah, I think my approach to most things, even if I care about a specific aesthetic, a lot of that is grounded in the the build aspect, the functionality. Functionality is huge for me. If we can make it look nice, great. But it's got to be strong.
I've heard that there's a little bit of a debate in the stone world, and maybe not, but the use of mortar. Are you okay with the use of mortar? Do you use mortar? And what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, some people have really strong feelings about it. I think some people feel like you kind of have to pick a side. Either like you're a dry stone guy or you're a mortar guy, and I, everything I do is dry pretty much. I I've done some veneer stuff. Like when I first started in, I did some mortar work, like brick block, and some wet stonework. Like I said, the thing I really liked was the dry stone, so that's why I really focused on that, and I was able to specialize and just like this is what I'm gonna do. Um, you know, I have done some jobs where maybe I did, walls and patios, and then they're like, hey, could you also like veneer the foundation of the house and make it the same, right? So it blends, and that's fine. Pretty much if I am doing any mortar work, it's dry look, and it's only because it's a very small part of a larger project. I mostly don't use mortar, but I don't have any beef with mortar. Like, I don't hate guys that use mortar. You know, what I don't like, and this is just like anything else, I don't like bad work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've seen a lot of bad mortar work where like someone might be using mortar like as glue or like just like slapping it up, and it's like really, it's not structurally sound, which again is like my main thing. It's like gonna fail, fall apart, it's sloppy, someone did it quick and dirty. Yeah, I don't like that. No one likes that. Nobody, I don't like bad dry stone work. I don't like bad work. I think I've seen, like, you see a good mortar mason, that's awesome. Like really, crisp, nice, good bedding, good joints, like really well done, structurally sound. You see a guy when he's using a trowel and it looks like an extension of his arm and they're like attached. That's beautiful. I got nothing but good things to say about that. Um, so, you know, yeah, I think some people just like to pick sides and then they got to dig in or whatever. And I just, you know, if you don't use it, that's fine. If you do use it, great. Either way, just like do good work, right? I don't know. I don't get too bent out of shape about it.
Gotcha. I'm just trying to start controversy because it's good for clicks, I think. So no, I'm just kidding. With that, with your work being so custom, and a client comes to you, how do you present them a plan with this is the look that we're going for, and how much? Yeah, let's start with that. How do you present a plan of this is the look that we're going for with your work being so custom as it is?
Sure. So, I mean, it always starts with a conversation first before anything. What are you thinking? Da 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 da. Site visit. We see what the property looks like. We see what the stone on the property looks like that's already there. If there are any existing walls or any historic elements or anything like that, all that's going to come into play. Um, I also will send usually maybe 10 or 15 pictures of just like different walls with different stone in different styles that I have done. And it's like, okay, it might not even look anything like this, but like this vibe, this style, like, do you want something like dressed and tight? Do you want something rustic and this? Like fieldstone, quarried stone. What are you thinking? Where are you looking? Do you want, you know, you do that because it's really hard for a lot of people to picture something that's not there. I'm sure you experience this all the time. A lot of clients, they can't see it until it's like 60% done. And then they go, oh, like now I can see it. You know what I mean? So, I'll send them a bunch of pictures. I'll like show them stuff on my Instagram. We can talk through different looks, different types of stone, and different styles. And then usually, generally, it makes the client a lot more comfortable with what's about to happen because now they're like, okay, even if I don't know exactly, it will be something like that. A picture I have on my phone that I can picture and see. Got it. So that's almost always how it starts because then you can start having the more complicated conversations of like what exactly kind of stone are we going to do? What exactly kind of tightness are we going to have? How tall? How long? This. How are we going to cope it? Are we going to go flat caps? Are
We
we
want
going
to
to
take a
do
break from today's
vertical
episode
copes?
to
We're going
thank
to
our
put them on
sponsor,
a
Cycle
45.
CPA. Are you
Now you
basing
got to
your
get into
business
more
decisions
detailing kind of
solely
stuff.
on a gut feeling? If
But
so,
if
you
they have
may be
some
leaving
kind of
potential
basis to
profits
go off
on
of,
the
it makes
table.
for a much
It's
more
crucial to
productive
base these
conversation.
important
Because
decisions
you don't want
on
to be
your
halfway through
financials,
building a
whether you're
wall
planning
and
to
the
hire a
client
new
shows up and is
employee,
like,
add another
oh,
crew, purchase equipment or vehicles, or
that's
take
not
on
at all
more
what I
debt
thought
to
it would look like,
support a new service line.
which
At
has
Cycle
happened,
CPA,
which
they
has
not
happened
only
before.
handle bookkeeping and
And
taxes,
that's,
but they also
no one
provide
likes that.
guidance and
It's bad
advisory
news, man.
services tailored to the landscape and
Is it
hardscape
hard at that
industry.
point
Their
to not
team
take it
of
personally
specialized
when
accountants
it's
ensures
when
that
it's
when it
a
comes
piece
to
of you
making the
basically
next
that
key
you've put
decision in
together
your
there?
company, you'll
I'm
have
a
a
lot better at
financial
it now.
partner in
I think
your corner. So visit them
I've
at
calmed down.
cyclecpa.com,
I'm like
and
I'm
for
more laid
$200
back
off,
than I
mention
used
the
to be.
How to Hardscape
I
podcast. Now back to our
took it
episode.
worse. I mean, I'm not perfect. Sometimes I still do, but like I handle it better.
Yeah.
You just gotta like kind of talk to. Okay, Bryce, just take a minute. But I definitely early on, like early on, I took it really hard because then it's just like I suck, And it's just like no, it's just like not what they want, and like that's really what made me force. Like it's like okay, I really need to shore things up on the front end as much as possible because it's a pretty big deal to start tearing things down once you've already done this much. Like there are a couple of key things that you can do before you start the job to really make sure you're on the same page. And so, yeah, I handle it better now. It also happens less now, right? So, and if now if it does, I'm like I always make sure to check in as soon as I finish the first section. I take a picture. If they're not on site, I'm like, how's this? Build a whole section to completion and be
Right.
like, this is what we're doing. Do a mock-up if possible. Like things like that save you a lot of time, which I definitely used to not do. But you tear down enough stuff, you start taking measures. You know what I mean?
So how much of those decisions are spontaneous on site, and how um especially if it's a client that you think that it might be an issue, how do you present that to them? And then before kind of moving forward with that spontaneous decision that you made on site. And I'll kind of reference something really quick here, just like a post that you had, and I'm blurred out there, but I don't know if let me unblur myself. I don't know if this was like a spontaneous decision, but something like this could have been where you decide to add the boulder in there to your wall. I don't know, but
Yeah.
how do you run that past the client?
So that's actually Masco's wall. I just hopped on that wall with
Oh,
him.
I see.
So
I've seen that
maybe
before, so now I know.
yeah, maybe
Okay.
try to pull one of mine. That I was just joining him for the day. I couldn't speak to what his process was on that.
Okay, but something like this, where you're adding in the different
Yeah.
corner units there, and was that
Yes.
discussed beforehand, or was that kind of spontaneous as to how you're going about that?
Yeah. So that was very much talked about beforehand
Okay.
because so with that wall specifically, it's 12 foot tall. It's 8 foot thick at the base. It's 400 tons of stone. Um, like there's going to be a lot of pressure on those corners. And as you can see, the material we're using, it doesn't really lend itself for corner stock. So she was very adamant about using that material for the wall because it was a geologic match to the stone that was already on her property. Um, about 100 tons of the stone came from her property, and we had to bring in an additional 300 tons. And so talking about how we were going to do the corners and ends was a pretty big conversation because we need that to be as strong as possible. You know, the corners and ends are going to take so much force
Right.
and so much pressure, and like they need to be as strong as possible. They need to be long, they need to be heavy, they need to have great contact. So that conversation, I said, okay, if we are going to use this stone for the wall, we're going to need stuff like this for the corners and ends to be able to handle that load and that force. And it was a pretty easy conversation. And I had done similar things before. So I was able to show her examples of, you know, field stone walls with granite corners and ends on a smaller scale, but the look is the same. And same thing. I showed her a couple pictures. She was able to wrap her mind around that. And she said, absolutely, I love it. Perfect.
So, do you have any spontaneous decisions on site that you maybe found the perfect rock that came from
Oh,
another
yeah.
site that you fit in there? And how do you run that past that client at that point in time to be able to get a go ahead if need be?
So if we're already underway, I would assume that I already have a pretty good handle on what the style is and what the vibe is. And I, at that point, my thought process is now I am building. We're in the building process. I know what you are looking for. If it's not a major structural element or a major change from design, I'm not usually running those decisions by the client because then now we're going to be on the phone all day. We're going to be sending messages back and forth all day. If it's a major difference, if it's like, oh, you know what, maybe we should put in some floating steps here, or like, oh, like maybe we should actually put an opening here or like put a gate here. That's a major structural change. That's a major design change. That's something that we should talk about. But if it's, you know, this rock there, like, no, like, we're not going to do that. Like, I mean, this is my job. I'm going to do my job. I can't be on the phone with you taking pictures of every single rock. And like, there have been clients like that before. Generally, now I just don't work with those clients. Like, if I meet a client and I'm like, you're going to be a problem, I'm just not going to do it. It's not worth it to me. It's not going to get any better once the job starts and once money is involved. It's not like if this is our first meeting and like there's already red flags like that, I'm like, oh, well, it's not going to improve once the project starts. So I just don't do it anymore. It's not worth it to me.
That makes sense. What are some red flags that kind of pop up maybe on that initial consultation where you're like, you know what, this is not a client that I'm going to move forward with?
Okay. So one, if I always if there is a couple, I always meet with both of them instead of just one of them. And if, you know, best as I can, sometimes there's scheduling conflicts, sometimes okay. But if they're adamant about the other person not being there, or like, oh no, don't worry, like, oh, she'll be or he'll be, or that's a red flag. Or if they're both there and they're arguing and it hasn't even started yet,
Yes.
or you know, if you're already underway and like I've gotten in the situation before where like I'll meet with one and then later I'll meet with the other and they're telling me different things and all of a sudden now I'm in between like what's clearly something else going on behind the scenes and like I'm just the stone guy but I'm in the middle of like a relationship crisis between them. Like, no, you know. So those are pretty big red flags. Also, just like, how do they talk to you? Do they talk down to you? I mean, I don't care who you are. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care what your job is. Like, okay, nope, we're not doing that. You know, I've had a lot of people talk to me like they were the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And I should just be so pleased and feel so fortunate to be in their presence. And I'm like, all right, I don't need this. I want to be treated. And that's the thing. And the thing is like some of the best people I've ever worked for could have easily treated me that way, were in a position to treat me that way from like a status or socioeconomic standpoint, and they didn't. Like that's a quality human being. That's someone
Yes.
I want to work for. That's someone who wants a quality product. That's someone who really wants me to go make them what they're looking for to the best of my ability. And that's someone that I kind of want to work with. Um, Another big red flag is just constantly trying to get the price down before there is even a price. You know, uh, I have no problem. I want to make this very clear. Some people ask a lot of questions, like, why is it so expensive? Or why does it cost that much? Or like, what goes into that number? Those questions are fine. That's a person who wants to understand and they have no frame of reference. Fine. But someone who is already coming in hot, trying to tell me how we can cut costs and drop things and like, oh, well, we already have stone on the property. I'm like, it's not enough. It's never enough. Whatever you think you have 20 tons. Okay, we need 100 tons. Like there's not, you don't know what I know. And I don't know what you know. Like I'm not a doctor and I'm not trying to pretend to be one, but you're not a stonemason. So like, let's just do our respective jobs here, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and that's the thing is like, a lot of people that are looking for this kind of work tend to be usually really good at whatever their respective field is. They're generally very successful people if they're looking for custom stonework. So they think because they are really good at what they do, they're really good at everything, including my job. So if they're going to already, take that approach with me before the job's even started and try to tell me how to do my job, that's not going to get better. That's not going to improve. And I used to just kind of take it if I thought the job was cool enough, or if I mean, when you need the money, you take whatever. But it kills you, man. It ends. You're trashing your body. You aren't happy to be going to the site because like, oh, like whatever, Jim's going to be there. Like, I just don't really want to talk to that guy and he's going to make me, he's going to want this for free or whatever. And just like, I mean, stonework's already hard, stonework is already, you have to love it to want to do it. And adding this additional element of like people who don't really get it or who don't really appreciate what you're trying to do or trying to just get to the bottom line and like it's just if I don't have to do it, I'm not going to do it. And when I started saying no to those people, I started getting better jobs in a weird way. Yeah.
That's interesting. I want to stick on, you just touched on pricing there. I want to stick on that, but very quickly, I just want to ask you, because it's come up actually fairly recently for me. When you do go to a consultation where that couple starts arguing, do you just leave? Do you just call it quits right then and there? Or do you try to stick out that consultation and then send in an email after saying, hey, this is probably not the project for me?
Um, I in the past I've stuck it out and I took the job and that was a mistake. Since then, if it's clear to me that it's going to be a problem, uh, generally the approach I take is like, you know, I'll try because it might just be a little thing. So you can't just like the first time they disagree, just like call it. But if it's a
Right.
reoccurring, like you try to like, it might just be something that you can handle with questions, or again, it's something that they can't visualize, So you can do some things to maybe smooth the small disagreements out.
Yes.
And then if there's mutual understanding, then you can kind of maybe get to a good place. If it's clear that it's going to be a problem, then it might just be like, hey, it sounds like there's a lot you two need to work out. It sounds like you guys don't have a clear picture of what you're looking for, you know, and, you know, I
That's a good
think
way to deal with it.
no, but it's true
It
because it's
is.
like, I can't do my job if you don't actually know what you want.
Yes.
If maybe you two talk this out a little bit more, get back to me if you have, and they almost never get back to you because they can never agree on what they want.
Right.
If they can sit down and hash this out, and then they're like, this is what we want, and we both agree on this, maybe we can go somewhere. But that hasn't happened
Okay. I had a really bad one recently, so I'm just looking for advice, I guess, myself there. So
yet. You can't fix it.
yeah.
They have to handle that business. You're there to make it happen. If they don't know what it's going to be, how are you supposed to know?
Mhm.
No, absolutely not.
When it comes to actually pricing your work, how do you go about pricing it with something that's so custom? Do you do just like time and materials and give them like a ballpark? This is what it's going to probably be in, or how do you go about pricing it?
Sure. Um, so every job is different.
Hmm.
Basically, in my book, every, how's the access, right? Is that going to be a problem? Where's the stone coming from? You know, how can we get machinery on site? Is it tight? Is it there only one entrance? Like, is there other work being done at the house at the same time? All of that stuff comes into play because it's going to heavily impact, your production, right? And a lot of this is a lot of the economics behind this is your like production rate, right? Production quality ratio, let's call it that. Um, and then again, different styles, different tightnesses, different types of stone. You're going to be running in like different production rates. So all of that impacts everything. So generally, what I do and what I have done in the past is I keep track of production for every job I do. And now I have data on like this type of stone, this fit, this type of stone, this style, dot, 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 dot. So I have a pretty good idea as long as I'm operating within territory that I'm familiar with to give a comfortable ballpark, which is generally how it's like, okay, if it's going to be this stone, this style, then you go look at the site, you see the access, you see what else is going on, blah, blah, blah. You can kind of shoot from the hip and talk to a client and be like, well, I can tell you comfortably it will cost at least this much before going any further. And that saves you a lot of time in terms of like not putting together full blown estimates for someone who's like, oh, no, thank you. Um, which helps. If they're comfortable with the ballpark, then you can sit down and actually do the line itemed deep dive. Um, but still, for the most part, best as I can, I try to keep them estimates and I try to keep them in a range because so many things can happen.
Right.
I I I generally don't do time and materials as my basis, unless it's a job where I'm getting into territory where like I've never done this before and I'm not really sure. Actually, I have an idea of what I think it should be, but whatever. If it's like uncharted waters, time and materials is a good way to kind of just cover yourself because you can at least get a general idea of your production and stone availability and things like that. But for the most part, I'll put together a full blown estimate based off of the stone, the style, the site, the access to materials, and I'll come up with something that's reasonably close. I'm almost always within a comfortable range of where I end up. Um, I tend to not do hard bids unless it's for the times where I've had to kind of stick it is sometimes if you're being brought in by a GC and you're part of like a larger scale project,
Right.
they will require a bid as opposed to an estimate. And in those cases, like I really do my homework. I really account for a lot more than I might in an estimate because there's just less room for error.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
How much of your work is that GC work versus the residential based?
It depends on the year.
Okay.
Um, so this is what I say. I would say in the last few years, I would say I've done at least one or two really large projects a year that I got brought in by a GC. And so like the whole project is very, very large and like I'm the stone guy. So, but those two projects might be, two of my biggest or two of my, from a scheduling standpoint, I think last year I did two large scale projects where I was brought in by a GC, but those two projects accounted for, 4 or 5 months of my season. And
Mhm.
then, so from a revenue and time standpoint, it might have been like 60/40, but in terms of number of jobs, right? A lot more of the stuff that I'm doing myself without being brought in are, you know, not of that scale for the most
Gotcha.
part. Yeah,
And so then I asked that to kind of focus in on leads and where they're coming from the time you started your business to where you are today. How has that changed? And has it just been like this ball rolling of word of mouth? Have you found that social media has brought in more and more clients to you with the visual aspect of it? Where are those leads coming from in that transition from the start of your business to where you are today?
sure. So basically, my first year that I was solo, 80% of what I did was sub work for other people.
Yeah, okay.
That's how and that kind of fit into my model of like I'm going to work with as many people as possible and learn
Right.
what they're doing, and I'm going to get paid to learn and paid to work and all that stuff. And then I only did a handful of jobs myself, um, which gave me plenty of time to prepare for them, plan. My schedule was relatively flexible, right? Your overhead is super low, right? You're only doing a handful of jobs yourself, and everything else, you're basically just showing up and working. And from that, I was actually able to expand my knowledge base, improve my skills, meet a lot of really talented people, network, and that worked out really well for my first year. That way, I'm not just diving in off the deep end. And that whole time that I was doing that, I got more stuff for the portfolio of like different things that I have done and different stone I'd worked with and different projects I've been a part of. So then by my second year, when I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sub a little less, I'm going to do more and more of my own stuff, you know, I had been getting attention of people because of social media, because they saw what I was doing and they saw that I could was capable of doing a lot of different things and providing a lot of different things. And because I was traveling so much for my sub work, I started getting people reaching out asking if I would travel for jobs, which is kind of, and that became like, I'll do, you know, a couple of pretty large travel jobs every year, which are highly profitable because you're able to provide a service to someone where maybe where they live, there aren't a lot of masons, there isn't a lot of stonework. Um, so the logistics are a nightmare and the timing is tough, but it's generally very profitable because you're able to charge, a premium for a service that, maybe no one in that state can do, or very few. Um, so because of my Instagram, I started getting more attention, both from clients and actually I got a lot of attention from like builders and architects.
Mhm.
And they saw what I was doing. They saw that I was traveling. And that piqued a lot of people's interests because there are plenty of jobs that are the job is where it is. And a lot of people are not willing to go. So, you get a phone call and it's like, hey, the job is whatever, West Coast, or let's just pretend, you know, would you be willing to go there? Yeah, no problem. And all of a sudden, word gets around that you're willing to go wherever for the job. Then
Right.
you start pulling some of those jobs while simultaneously building out your like local base. So it ended up, a lot of it came from social media and word of mouth. Word got around. I've met a lot of people because of the networking and the subbing that I did with everybody and the traveling I did with everything. So now, you know, you might get a phone call from someone saying, like, hey, I'm building this. Would you be willing to hop on my crew as a sub? And then you get the opportunity to build that way. Or you get a phone call from someone being like, hey, I saw you did this there. Would you do that here? And then you're like, yeah, no problem. And then it just kind of built on top of itself. And now you have just this massive portfolio of, in a relatively short amount of time, of like the full range of so many different things that you could build because you've done it already. And that, I think, makes the client acquisition process easier because there's like a level of confidence that they have in you because they see how much you've done. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It even says in your bio on Instagram, we'll travel anywhere in the world for the right project. Did you put that in there after you noticed that people were finding you through Instagram and seeing that you would travel for work? Or did you always have that in there and you were always willing to travel for work?
Always.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to learn and I
Hmm.
wanted to do more. And that was always how I thought about it. I just didn't think it was going to happen that fast. And it did.
Are you comfortable with going somewhere where you may not know the stone, the local stone, they want that local stone look as well? Are you comfortable with going in there without or have you already kind of experienced a broad range with all your travels of all the different types of hardnesses and grits and all that you're pretty comfortable with any situation you get put into right now,
Um,
especially with
if it,
sourcing? Like, I look at logistics too in this as well.
yeah. So if it's a stone that I've never used before, especially if it's a travel job, actually any travel job, pretty much these days, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to build a mock-up.
Mhm.
I Before we are ordering stone, before stone is on site, like I'll do whatever a 10-foot stretch of wall somewhere on the property with that stone. You buy whatever, 5, 6 pallets or something, you know, because you're either going to use it or you won't. Um, uh, m- Many times the stone's very similar to something I've used before. But if I have never used that or anything like that before, like I'm definitely going to build a mock up because I want certainty before we actually start the project. Like, this is what you want. And then I've even done situations like this where, if I'm building a wall with two sides, I might build this side, the front side, one style, and I'll build the back side a different style with the same stone. And then I'll be like, are you looking more like this or are you looking like this? And that has saved me tons of time because they're like, oh, we want the front face. That's what we want. We don't want the back. I'm like, okay, great. And like, that is also going to help me with my pricing because I can literally tell you how much longer that front side would take than the back side.
Hmm.
Like, it's like, oh, like, if I can literally tell you, like, oh, that's going to take, whatever, 20% longer on average, right? And that's all going into your metrics for production and
Right.
understanding. It's like, I mean, I've worked with this stone, or I've worked the amount I had to work the stone to achieve this look, or not work the stone for this look, right? To make it look the way you want it to look, I can tell you how much time it'll take me to do that, at least on an average level. And like that's how you can get more comfortable with your pricing too if it's an unknown. material.
Right. Do you have a dream job or a dream feature that you want to build?
Ah, man, I'd, there's a couple, there's a bunch. I'd like to build a bridge. Uh, you know, a, an arch bridge would be sweet. Um, I'd love to build a house, just like a full stone structural house. Um, that would be, those two are pretty big up there for me. Um, it's not a lot of people go for structural stone anymore, especially dwellings, because you know liability is a big thing, and a lot of structural engineers don't want to sign off on it. But if you can find the right client and you can find you know someone who's down to really commit to that, I would love to build a house.
Gotcha. Um, One more question before I've already held you up for more than an hour here.
That's
Um,
fun.
so take as long as you want or as little as you want with this. In terms of employees and growth and scaling with this type of business, where do you see yourself in the future with this? Do you see yourself bringing on more and more people and building scaling this larger, or is this something that you see like you yourself staying in the field because this is your vision sort of thing? I see these businesses where it's like it is an art, and it's difficult to scale art. Where do you see yourself doing this, and do you see yourself scaling it?
Sure. So right now I have no employees, but I put together crews on a project by project basis if I need more guys.
Mhm.
And in doing it that way, I'm able to put together a group of people whose strengths I know, whose quality I can trust, because most of these guys have their own businesses.
Mhm.
Um, and I've done that several times for some of these larger scale jobs where you might need 5, 6 guys, or maybe even, 9 or 10 guys, but you only need them for 4 weeks, right? 5 weeks, maybe. So I like doing that because you're able to hit a certain quality because everyone you're bringing is solid. You know that they can work together because we've done it before. And you don't have to compromise, right? Like a lot of times when people grow, the quality goes down, at least for some amount of time, if not completely. Um, that's not the case. So most of the time, I'm working by myself, maybe with one other guy who, you know, I hire him as a sub or whatever. But when I do need guys, there are plenty of really talented people to pick from. They can't give you a season because they're slammed too, but they can give you a few weeks if you give them a heads up. And like a lot of these guys work solo or maybe with one other guy. You put 7 or 8 or 10 of them together in the same place, you'd be pretty amazed what you can get built. So yeah, no, for me, I'm pretty lean and mean. I keep my overhead very low. I don't have a whole lot of anything really. And I like it that way. Maybe things will change in the future, but as of now, like even when I'm running those jobs, the amount of wall I get to build goes down because now you're taking over part manager, you're talking to whatever the GC or architects or whoever else is on site that you have to deal with. You get pulled off the job a little bit. And, I'm not interested in being someone who just is managing other people building. Like I do this because I love to build and that's what I want to do. I worry that, if you try to expand and get a bunch of employees, now you got to keep them busy. You need to make sure they're fed. Maybe you have to start taking jobs that you wouldn't normally take just to keep them going. What are they doing? Their name is attached to your name. There's going to be that drop in quality. And like, I don't accept that. Maybe my feelings will change in the future. Maybe I'll find someone that I feel I'm going to like train this guy up. But in the short term, I really like the way I've been doing it because I've been able to build some really awesome things with some really talented people without having to, you know, really overstep and overcommit to a whole lot of overhead.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Bryce, it's been a pleasure to get to talk with you during this time. I have to ask one more question that I ask everybody that comes on the show. And it's feel free to take it wherever you want, but it's one thing you know now that you wish you knew from the very beginning. That could be business related, could be personal related. Take it wherever you want to. But what is one thing you know now that you wish you knew from the very beginning?
I wish that I knew how, because again, I started with no frame of reference and no real understanding of the industry. Um, I wish I knew, I guess how I wish I knew my value early. I, I did not make any money for quite some time. Those first, whatever, several years, and they were really hard. And I accepted whatever someone was willing to pay me because in my head, I was just like, well, if I can do it, it can't be that hard, which is not a great mindset. And I'm not really sure, but I was going in being like, I don't really have a background in this. And like, you know, uh, yeah, I'm new I don't have, but like, I also like, I'm like, well, I'm 6'3", 250 and I work really hard. And like, there's a lot of guys standing around not working really hard, and they're all getting paid more than I am. And I just accepted that. Um, and there was just a lot of unnecessary uh, pain early, and definitely a lot of damage to the body that was unnecessary early. Um, because I just assumed that everyone was more valuable than I was. And then it wasn't until later that I was like, oh, no, they just get paid more because they they've been here longer or they don't put up with it or they're more, they they speak up more for
Mhm.
themselves and instead of just being like, yeah, I'm just gonna put my head down and I'm just gonna take this and like they'll see. Like, no, like I didn't start really making more money until I started like advocating for myself. And then you really don't start making money until you start working for yourself because like, you know, there's a lot of people out there that are going to try to keep you as cheap as possible because it's good for them. And if you spend a lot of time not making a lot of money and that's the feedback you're getting from the people you work for, you're going to start believing you're like this is what I'm worth. Whether that's, I mean, that's terrible. It's not good, but it does happen. And you just have to, I wish I had given myself enough credit during that time.
That's excellent. And a great thing to end things off on, except for my last question. Stone Bear Mason, where does that come from?
It's a third last question. All right. No, it's good. It's fine. It keeps me on my toes. Um, yeah, I don't know. I was very, actually very resistant to making an Instagram. I'm not, if I didn't do stonework, I wouldn't have an Instagram. And, when I started posting on Instagram, all my friends were like, you have an Instagram? Like, I don't think you're going to be very good at it. You don't really like this kind of thing. And they were all pretty surprised. But I eventually caved, and I'm glad I did because it turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made. Um, but yeah, you had to make up a handle, and I wanted it to be. I literally was just like Stone Bear Mason. Like it, it covers the whole territory. It's I've always kind of I guess you'd say it's like my spirit animal, right? Like I've always kind of like felt, you know, akin to a bear. And so have other people at different points in my life. That's just kind of like been a thing. And so, yeah, it's like the first handle I thought of immediately. Like as soon as I decided I was going to have an Instagram, it was just like bop, bop, bop. And I was like, oh, that's what it is.
Beautiful.
And yeah, it fit just right.
Excellent. I'm sorry, Bryce. Fourth last question. Where can our audience go find out more about you? Where do you want to direct them to? That's it. That's what I'll leave you with.
Sure. I mean, easiest and best is checking out my Instagram at stonebearmason.
Bryce, thanks so much for your time.
All right. Thank you, man.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. Go check out Bryce at Stone Bear Mason. Give him some love. Let him know that you heard him here on the How to Hardscape podcast. Definitely give him a follow to see everything that he's got going on over there. And if you're looking to also follow more accounts on Instagram, cycle_CPA for great educational content. If you're looking for bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA there. That's cycle_CPA on Instagram. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you for money off their services there. And if you're looking for a software, How to Hardscape headquarters can help you with that. Shoot me a message at How to Hardscape on Instagram if you want to book a demo to learn more about that. And we look forward to meeting with you next week on the How to Hardscape podcast.